The salt air clung to Elira's skin like a second layer, thick and unforgiving. As she knelt beside the tidal pools at the edge of Cala Roja, the sun hung low over the Caribbean horizon, painting the sky in violent strokes of orange and crimson, colors that reminded her too much of fire, of anger, of the day they'd cast her out. She dug her fingers into the wet sand, searching for clams buried beneath the surface. Her basket sat half empty beside her, a pitiful haul for an entire afternoon's work. Still scrounging like a beggar, Elira. Her voice called from the rocky path above. She didn't look up. She knew the voice. Mateo, one of the fisherman's sons who used to play with her as children before everything changed. "Before the map. Leave her be, Mateo," another voice said softer. "Carmen, at least she still had a shred of kindness left in her." "Why?" "She's the one who lied to the whole village. Said she found some magical treasure map." Mateo's laugh was harsh, cutting through the rhythm of the waves. "My father lost half his savings believing her nonsense. She deserves worse than scrounging." Elira's jaw tightened, but she kept digging. She'd learned years ago that defending herself only made things worse. The truth was a burden she carried alone. The map was real, hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her tiny shack on the outskirts of the village. She'd found it in her grandfather's belongings after he died, tucked inside an old leather journal filled with cryptic notes and sketches of unfamiliar coastlines. When she'd shown it to the village elder at 16, desperate and grieving, they'd called it a forgery, a fantasy. Her grandfather, they said, had been a drunk and a storyteller, nothing more. When she'd insisted it was genuine, begged them to help her decipher it, they turned on her, accused her of trying to swindle them, of preying on their hopes for easy wealth. She'd been 19 when they'd officially shunned her. Now at 25, she existed on the margins, taking work no one else wanted, sleeping in a shack that leaked when it rained, speaking only when spoken to. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and Elira gathered her meager catch. She climbed the rocky path toward her shack, ignoring the way people turned their backs as she passed through the edge of the village. The map pressed against her thoughts like a physical weight. Sometimes she wondered if she should burn it, be done with the secret that had destroyed her life. But she couldn't. It was all she had left of her grandfather, and deep down, beneath the layers of bitterness and exhaustion, she still believed it was real. The shack sat perched on a small cliff overlooking the sea, isolated and weather-beaten. Elira pushed open the door, which hung crooked on its hinges, and stepped inside. The single room smelled of brine and old wood. She lit a candle and set her basket on the rickety table, then knelt beside her sleeping mat and pried up the loose floorboard. The map lay beneath, wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it carefully, her fingers tracing the faded ink lines that depicted islands she'd never seen, waters she'd never sailed. Strange symbols marked certain locations, and in the corner, in her grandfather's shaky handwriting, "Para mi nieta valiente. La verdad está en las estrellas, for my brave granddaughter." The truth is, in the stars. She'd stared at those words 1,000 times, trying to understand. Her grandfather had been a sailor once, before age and rum had grounded him. He'd told her stories of hidden coves and cursed gold, of pirate kings and ships that vanished into fog. She'd thought they were just stories, until she'd found the map. A distant boom shattered the quiet night. Elira's head snapped up, heart hammering. Another boom followed, then another. Cannons. She rushed to the window and looked toward the village. Orange flames licked up from the harbor, illuminating ships she didn't recognize. Black sails. The Jolly Roger flying high. Pirates' screams echoed across the water, carried on the wind. Elira's hands shook as she watched the chaos unfold below. Cala Roja was small, defenseless. They had no garrison, no warships. The pirates would take what they wanted and leave nothing but ash and grief. She should hide, should stay here out of sight and let the raid pass. The villagers had made it clear she wasn't one of them anymore, but Carmen's face flashed through her mind, and old Senora Torres, who still left fish wrapped in paper outside Elira's door sometimes, pretending it wasn't charity. And the children who didn't yet understand why they weren't supposed to talk to her, Elira grabbed her small knife and ran toward the village. The harbor was chaos. Pirates swarmed the docks, torches in hand, dragging villagers from their homes. Crates of goods were being hauled toward the pirate ships, 3 vessels with sleek predatory lines and crews that moved with brutal efficiency. Elira pressed herself against the side of a building, searching for anyone she could help. Please. That's all we have. Mateo's father was on his knees before a massive pirate with gold teeth, begging. The pirate struck him across the face with the butt of his pistol. Elira's stomach twisted, but before she could move, a hand clamped over her mouth and yanked her backward into an alley. "Don't scream!" A low voice growled in her ear. She thrashed, but her captor was strong, and then she saw the knife at her throat gleaming in the firelight. The pirate spun her around. He was young, maybe 30, with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, and eyes that assessed her like she was cargo. "What's a scrawny thing like you doing skulking around during a raid?" he asked, his accent thick, Spanish mixed with something else. "Let me go," Elira hissed. He grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Not likely. Captain might want to see you. You look desperate enough to fetch a decent ransom, or you know something useful." His gaze dropped to the small pouch at her belt, where she kept her knife and a few coins. Then his eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Before Elira could react, he tore the pouch from her belt. The oilcloth-wrapped map tumbled out, and the pirate caught it with surprising grace. "No!" Elira lunged for it, but he shoved her back against the wall. He unwrapped the oilcloth, and his expression changed from curiosity to shock. "Holy hell," he breathed. "Where did you get this?" "It's nothing," Elira said desperately. "Just an old family heirloom. Please give it back. Rafe!" Another pirate appeared at the mouth of the alley, broader and meaner looking. "Captain wants everyone back on the ships." "We've got enough loot." Rafe held up the map. "Tell the captain I found something better than loot." They dragged Elira through the burning village, past weeping families and ransacked homes, toward the largest of the 3 ships. The vessel loomed in the harbor like a great black beast, its sails furled but ready. The name painted on the hull made her blood run cold. La Sombra del Diablo, the devil's shadow. "Move!" Rafe shoved her up the gangplank. The deck was organized chaos, pirates securing cargo, checking weapons, shouting orders. And at the center of it all, standing beside the mainmast with his arms crossed, was a man who could only be the captain. He was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a loose tail, and a coat of deep blue velvet that seemed absurdly fine for a pirate. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Pale grey like storm clouds, and cold enough to freeze the Caribbean itself. A wicked scar cut across his left cheekbone, and his jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. Captain Draven. She'd heard the name whispered in the village, a pirate lord who commanded a fleet and showed no mercy. Rafe approached him and handed over the map. "Found this on a girl hiding in the village, Captain. Thought you'd want to see it." Draven unfolded the map, and for a long moment he was utterly still. Then his gaze lifted and locked onto Elira with an intensity that made her want to run. "Bring her here," he said quietly. They shoved her forward until she stood directly before him. Up close, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered and radiating a kind of controlled violence that made her heart race. "Where did you get this?" His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "It belonged to my grandfather," Elira said, lifting her chin, despite the fear coursing through her. "And does your grandfather know how to read it?" He's dead." Draven's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you know how to read it?" Elira hesitated. This was her last card, the only thing that might keep her alive. Yes, it was a lie. She'd studied the map for years and understood only fragments, but he didn't need to know that. Draven stepped closer, towering over her. "You're lying." "I'm not." He studied her for a long, unbearable moment, then smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "Good, because you're going to guide us to whatever treasure this map leads to. And if you try to deceive me, I'll throw you to the sharks myself." Elira's breath caught. "And if I refuse?" Draven leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. Then I'll burn what's left of your village to the ground and make you watch, her hands clenched into fists. She thought of Carmen, of Senora Torres, of the children. They'd cast her out, yes, but they didn't deserve to die. Fine, she whispered. I'll guide you. Draven straightened and handed the map back to Rafe. Take her below. Give her a hammock in the crew quarters and make sure she's fed. She's no good to us dead. As they dragged her toward the hatch, Elira looked back at the captain. He was already turning away, barking orders to his crew, as if she were nothing more than another piece of cargo. But she'd seen the way he'd looked at the map, with hunger. Yes, but also something else, recognition. He knew what it was, which meant the treasure was real, and somehow that terrified her more than anything else. The crew quarters reeked of sweat, rum, and unwashed bodies. Elira sat in a corner on a thin hammock, her arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the creak of the ship as it cut through the waves. They'd set sail before dawn, leaving Cala Roja smoldering behind them. She hadn't been allowed on deck to watch her home disappear, but she'd felt the moment the anchor lifted, a lurch in her stomach that had nothing to do with seasickness. Around her, pirates sprawled in hammocks or on the floor, some sleeping, others playing cards or sharpening weapons. They ignored her for the most part, though she caught a few curious glances. Rafe sat nearby, cleaning his pistol with practiced ease. You really know how to read that map? He asked without looking up. Elira didn't answer. He chuckled. Suit yourself. But fair warning, Captain doesn't tolerate lies. If you're playing him, you won't live long enough to regret it. I'm not playing anyone, she said quietly. Good. Rafe finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because if that map's real, it leads to the hoard of Alonso Vega. Half the Caribbean's been searching for it for 50 years. Elira's heart skipped. Alonso Vega. Her grandfather had mentioned that name in his journal. A Spanish privateer turned pirate who'd amassed a fortune before vanishing without a trace. You think it's real? She asked carefully. Rafe shrugged. Captain thinks it is. And he's not often wrong. He paused, then added, word of advice, don't cross him. Draven's got a reputation for a reason. He's smart, ruthless, and doesn't forgive betrayal. Before Elira could respond, the hatch above creaked open, and a voice called down. Girl! Captain wants you topside. Her stomach dropped, but she forced herself to stand and climbed the narrow ladder. Sunlight blinded her as she emerged onto the deck. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, a brilliant blue that would have been beautiful if she weren't a prisoner. Captain Draven stood at the helm, one hand on the wheel, his coat billowing in the wind. He looked every bit the pirate lord, commanding, dangerous, and utterly in control. Come here, he said without turning. Elira approached slowly, her legs unsteady on the swaying deck. When she reached him, he finally looked at her, those cold grey eyes assessing. I've been thinking about our arrangement, he said, and I've decided you need more incentive to cooperate. Her pulse quickened. You threatened my village. What more incentive do I need? A faint smile touched his lips. True, but threats only work if you believe I'll follow through. And I suspect you're the kind of person who's willing to gamble with other people's lives if it means protecting your own secrets. He wasn't wrong, and that realization stung. Draven pulled the map from his coat and unfolded it on the helm's wooden surface. So here's the new bargain. You guide us to the treasure, and I'll give you a share. 10%, Elira stared at him. What? You heard me. 10% of whatever we find. Enough to buy yourself a new life far from that miserable village. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Or you can refuse, and I'll find someone else to decipher this map. There are scholars in Port Royal who'd kill for the chance, though it might take months to track one down. Months your village doesn't have. You're lying, Elira said, though her voice wavered. You won't go back, won't I? Draven's smile was sharp. I'm a pirate, Miss Elira. I do whatever benefits me. And making an example of a village that harbored a traitor, that benefits me greatly. She hated him. Hated the calm certainty in his voice, the way he spoke of burning homes and killing innocents like it was a business transaction, but she also believed him. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. I'll do it, but I want 15%. Draven laughed, a genuine startled sound that made several crew members glance over. "You've got nerve. I'll give you that." He extended a hand. 12%. Final offer? Elira hesitated, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and strangely gentle. "Good," Draven said. "Now let's see what you know. Show me the route." Elira studied the map, her mind racing. She recognized some of the landmarks. The cluster of islands in the eastern Caribbean, the symbol that matched the constellation her grandfather had taught her. But the path itself was unclear, obscured by water damage and faded ink. "We need to sail east," she said slowly, tracing a finger along the map. "Toward the Windward Islands. There's a symbol here." She pointed to a small star that corresponds to a navigational point. "My grandfather's notes mentioned using the stars to find the first waypoint." Draven leaned over her shoulder, so close she could feel the heat of his body. "And you can navigate by stars?" "My grandfather taught me," she said, which was true. He'd spent countless nights on the beach with her, pointing out constellations and explaining how sailors used them to find their way. "Then you'll work with my navigator," Draven said. "Teach him what you know. And Miss Elira?" His voice hardened. "If I find out you're leading us in circles, the deal is off." "Understood." He straightened and called across the deck. "Rafe, get Torres up here. He's working with our new navigator." Rafe appeared with an older man in tow, Torres, the ship's navigator, who had weathered brown skin and eyes that missed nothing. He looked Elira up and down, then spat over the rail. "You expect me to take orders from a girl?" He growled. "I expect you to help her read this map," Draven said coolly. "Or I'll find someone who will." Torres grumbled, but took the map, spreading it on a nearby crate. Elira joined him, and together they began cross-referencing her grandfather's notes with the ship's charts. It was slow, painstaking work, but gradually a route began to emerge, a path that wound through treacherous reefs and uncharted waters toward an island that didn't appear on any official map. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. Elira's head throbbed and her stomach growled, but she didn't dare stop. She could feel Draven watching from the helm, his presence a constant weight. Finally, as the first stars appeared, Torres grunted in satisfaction. "There, if this is right, we're 3 days from the first waypoint." "Good," Draven said. "Set the course." As the crew scrambled to adjust the sails, Elira slumped against the rail, exhausted. Rafe appeared beside her with a flask of water and a piece of hardtack. "Eat," he said. "You look like you're about to pass out." She took the offerings gratefully, too tired to argue. "Does he always watch people like that?" she asked, nodding toward Draven. Rafe followed her gaze. "The captain? He watches everything. Doesn't trust easy. Comes from being betrayed too many times." He paused, then added, "But if you prove yourself, he's loyal to a fault. I've sailed with him for 5 years, and I'd follow him into hell itself." Elira didn't know what to say to that. She chewed the hardtack in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. That night, she slept fitfully in her hammock, dreaming of burning villages and cold grey eyes. The storm hit on the second day. Elira had been on deck, working with Torres, when the sky darkened with unnatural speed. The wind picked up, howling through the rigging, and the sea turned violent. "All hands." Draven's voice cut through the chaos. "Secure the cargo and reef the sails." Pirates swarmed the deck, moving with practiced efficiency despite the pitching ship. Elira clung to the rail, spray soaking her to the bone as waves crashed over the bow. "Get below," Rafe shouted, grabbing her arm. "The map! Torres has it! Move!" He dragged her toward the hatch, but before they reached it, a massive wave slammed into the ship. Elira lost her grip and went sliding across the deck, straight toward the rail and the churning sea beyond. She screamed, scrabbling for purchase, but the wet wood offered nothing to hold on to. A hand clamped around her wrist. Iron strong. Elira looked up into Draven's face. He'd braced himself against the mast, his other hand locked around a rope, and he hauled her back with surprising ease. For a moment, they were face to face, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "I told you," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You're no good to me dead." Then he shoved her toward Rafe. "Get her below, now." This time Elira didn't argue. She let Rafe pull her down into the crew quarters, where the sounds of the storm were muted, but the ship's pitching was even worse. She wedged herself into a corner and held on, praying the vessel wouldn't capsize. The storm raged for hours. By the time it finally passed, leaving the ship battered but intact, Elira's hands were cramped from gripping the wooden beams. She climbed back on deck at dawn to find the crew assessing the damage. One of the masts had cracked, and several barrels of supplies had been lost overboard, but La Sombra del Diablo had survived. Draven stood at the helm, soaked and exhausted, but still commanding. When he saw Elira, something flickered in his expression, relief maybe, though it was gone too quickly to be sure. "Still alive, I see," he said. "Thanks to you." He waved off the gratitude. "I need you alive, remember? Self-interest, nothing more." But Elira had felt the strength in his grip, seen the determination in his eyes as he'd pulled her from the edge. That hadn't been the action of a man motivated purely by greed. She was beginning to suspect Captain Draven was far more complicated than he wanted anyone to believe. The third day brought them to the first waypoint, a crescent-shaped island barely large enough to hold a dozen palm trees. Elira stood at the bow as they approached, her heart pounding. According to her grandfather's notes, this island held the clue to the treasure's final location. "There," she said, pointing to the northern shore. "We need to land there." Draven gave the order, and they dropped anchor in the shallow waters. A small landing party was assembled. Draven, Rafe, Torres, two other pirates named Marco and Jin, and Elira herself. The beach was pristine, untouched, the sand white as bone. Elira led them inland, following the crude sketch in her grandfather's journal. The jungle was thick, humid, alive with the sounds of insects and birds. Sweat dripped down her back as they pushed through the undergrowth. "There," Elira said finally, stopping before a massive stone carved with symbols, the same symbols from the map. Draven stepped forward, running his fingers over the weathered carvings. "What does it say?" Elira crouched beside the stone, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. "La verdad está en las estrellas." She looked up. The jungle canopy blocked most of the sky, but through a gap she could see the sun, and she knew that at night this spot would offer a clear view of the stars. "It's a celestial marker," she said. "We need to come back at night and take a reading. The stars will point us to the next location." Draven nodded slowly. "Then we wait." They returned to the ship as the sun set, and Elira spent the intervening hours poring over the map with Torres, calculating angles and trajectories. When darkness finally fell, they returned to the stone. The stars were breathtaking, a river of light stretching across the black sky. Elira used Torres's sextant to measure the position of specific constellations, cross-referencing them with her grandfather's notes. "There," she said at last, pointing northwest. "The next waypoint is approximately 200 miles in that direction." Draven studied her face in the moonlight. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be." "Good enough." He turned to the others. "Let's move." But as they walked back toward the beach, Elira caught a whispered conversation between Marco and another pirate, a man named Santos she hadn't met. "Not sure we need the girl anymore," Marco was saying. "Captain won't like it," Santos replied. "Captain's getting soft. Did you see how he grabbed her during the storm? He's distracted." Elira's blood ran cold. She glanced at Draven, who was walking ahead, seemingly oblivious. Should she warn him? Or would he dismiss her concerns as paranoia? Before she could decide, they reached the beach and found the longboats destroyed, holes smashed through their hulls. "What the hell?" Rafe drew his pistol, scanning the trees. Draven's face darkened. "Spread out." Going to whoever did this. They searched the area but found no one. It wasn't until they returned to the ship that the truth became clear. Half the crew was armed and waiting on deck, led by a scarred, hulking man named Garza. "Mutiny," Draven said quietly, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt. "That's right, Captain." Garza's grin was ugly. "You've gotten weak." chasing fairy tales, trusting some village girl with our lives. The men are tired of it. We're taking the ship and the map. Around them, the loyal crew members, Rafe, Torres, Jin, and a few others, drew their weapons. But they were outnumbered 2-1. You really want to do this, Gaza? Draven's voice was dangerously calm. I made you my quartermaster, gave you a share of every prize we've taken, and now I'm taking it all. Gaza raised his pistol, aiming at Draven's chest. Nothing personal, Captain. Just business. The shot rang out before Elira could scream, but Draven had moved, impossibly fast, diving to the side as the bullet whizzed past. In the same motion, he drew his own pistol and fired. Gaza went down with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Pistols fired, swords clashed, and the deck became a battlefield. Elira pressed herself against the rail, heart hammering, as Draven and his loyalists fought desperately against the mutineers. Then she saw Marco creeping toward the captain's cabin, toward the map. Without thinking, Elira grabbed a belaying pin and charged. Marco spun at the last second, knife in hand, but she swung the heavy wooden pin with all her strength. It connected with his temple and he crumpled. Elira! Rafe appeared beside her, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Get to the cabin and barricade yourself in. No, now! She ran, darting through the fighting, and slammed the cabin door behind her. The map lay on Draven's desk, and she snatched it up, stuffing it into her shirt. Then she grabbed a sword from the wall, an elegant rapier that felt absurdly light in her hands, and turned to face the door. Minutes passed like hours. The sounds of fighting slowly died down, replaced by groans and heavy breathing. Then the door burst open. Elira raised the sword, but it was Draven who entered. His coat torn and bloodied, a cut across his cheek. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, something raw and unguarded flashed across his face. You're alive, he said. So are you. He crossed the cabin in 2 strides and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace that left her breathless. You saved the map. And possibly my life. Marco was going to stab me in the back. I couldn't let them take it, Elira said, her voice shaking. Draven pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. You're braver than I thought. Foolish, but brave. He took the map from her and set it on the desk. The mutiny's over. Garza and his conspirators are in the brig. But we lost good men today. I'm sorry, don't be. This is the pirate's life. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. Get some rest. We sail at dawn. Elira hesitated. Captain, why did you save me? During the storm, I mean. You could have let me fall. Draven looked up at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. Because I've seen too many people die for no good reason. And you're not like the others. You're honest in your own way. That's rare. It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him, and it made her chest ache. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded, already turning back to his charts. Go, before I change my mind about that 12%. Elira left, but as she descended to the crew quarters, she couldn't shake the memory of his arms around her, or the strange, unfamiliar warmth it had kindled in her chest. The final voyage took them into waters Elira had only dreamed of, a stretch of the Caribbean so remote it didn't appear on any chart. The sea here was a different shade of blue, almost turquoise, and the air tasted different. Cleaner, there, Elira said on the 5th morning, pointing to a mist-shrouded island rising from the water like a ghost. That's it. The final location. Draven ordered the ship to slow, and they approached cautiously. The island was larger than the waypoint, covered in dense jungle, with jagged cliffs rising from the shore. And at its center, half hidden by vegetation, stood the ruins of a Spanish fort, Alonso Vega's stronghold. Torres breathed. It's real. They anchored offshore and took the longboats to the beach. The landing party was smaller now, just Draven, Rafe, Torres, Jin, and Elira. The mutiny had culled the crew, and Draven trusted only a handful of men. The jungle was oppressive, thick with vines and thorns, but Elira led them unerringly, following the landmarks in her grandfather's journal. The fort loomed closer, its stone walls crumbling but still imposing. There, Elira said, stopping before a collapsed section of wall. The entrance is beneath this. They cleared away the debris to reveal a stone staircase descending into darkness. Draven lit a torch and they descended. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, and Elira's breath caught. Gold gleamed in the torchlight, coins, bars, jeweled artifacts piled high. Chests overflowed with treasures, and against the far wall stood a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, a skeleton slumped upon it. "Alonso Vega," Draven said quietly, approaching the throne. "He died guarding his hoard." "More fool him," Rafe muttered, already scooping gold into a sack. But Elira noticed something else. A small wooden box on the throne's armrest, carved with the same symbols as the map. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Spanish in her grandfather's handwriting. "What is it?" Draven asked, moving to her side. Elira read aloud, translating as she went. "My dearest Elira, if you're reading this, then you've proven yourself braver and smarter than I ever dared hope. This treasure is yours by right. Alonso Vega was your ancestor, and I was his grandson. I never told the village, because I knew they'd never believe me. But the blood of pirates runs in your veins, girl. Use this gold to build the life you deserve." "With all my love, Abuelo," tears blurred her vision. Her grandfather had known. He'd left this for her, a legacy and an apology all at once. "Your ancestor," Draven said softly. "That makes you the rightful heir to all of this." Elira looked at him, startled. "What?" "Pirate law. If Vega was your blood, the treasure's yours." He gestured to the chamber. "Every last coin. But you brought me here. Your crew risked their lives, and you risked yours to save the map." "To save me?" Draven's grey eyes held hers. "I said I'd give you 12%. I'm giving you all of it." "I don't want all of it," Elira said, her voice fierce. "You earned your share. Take half. No, take 60%. "I'll take the rest." Draven laughed, shaking his head. "You're arguing to give me more. You really are the strangest woman I've ever met, and you're the strangest pirate." They stood there, surrounded by gold, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than treasure or bargains. 50-50, Draven said finally, "and I'll help you transport your share anywhere you want to go." "Deal." They shook hands, and this time neither let go immediately. It took 3 days to haul the treasure back to the ship. By the time they finished, La Sombra del Diablo sat low in the water, her hold packed with riches. On the final night, Elira stood at the rail, watching the island disappear into the darkness. Draven joined her, 2 cups of rum in hand. He offered her one, and she took it. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know," Elira admitted. "Buy a ship, maybe. See the world. I've spent so long being trapped in one place. I want to be free." "That sounds like a pirate's dream. Maybe I am a pirate. After everything." Draven smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "If you ever want a place on this crew, you've got one. We could use a navigator who's not afraid to swing a belaying pin at mutineers." Elira laughed. "I'll think about it." They fell silent, sipping their rum. Then Draven said, "I'm sorry for what I did to your village. For threatening you." Elira looked at him surprised. "Why are you apologizing now?" "Because you deserved better than that. And because," he hesitated, "because somewhere along the way you stopped being cargo and started being someone I care about." Elira's breath caught. In the moonlight, Draven looked different, younger, more vulnerable. The cold pirate lord had given way to something warmer, more human. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "Which is inconvenient considering you're a wanted criminal and I'm supposed to hate you." Life's full of inconveniences. He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "Come with us, not as a prisoner or a hired navigator, as part of the crew. As my partner, your partner, in every sense." His hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with her own. "I've been alone a long time, Elira. I'd forgotten what it was like to have someone watch my back, to trust someone completely. You gave me that, and I don't want to lose it." Elira's heart hammered against her ribs. A month ago, she'd been scrounging for clams on a beach, shunned and alone. Now she stood on the deck of a pirate ship, holding the hand of one of the most feared men in the Caribbean, with enough gold in the hold to buy a kingdom. "What about Cala Roja?" she asked. "The village is full of people who turned their backs on you when you needed them most," Draven said bluntly. "You owe them nothing. But if you want to send them money, help rebuild what we burned, I won't stop you." "Hell, I'll help. But don't throw away your freedom for people who never valued you." He wasn't wrong. "And yet, I need to go back," Elira said. "Just once, to say goodbye properly. To show them they were wrong about me and about the map." Draven nodded slowly. "Then we'll go back together. You'd risk it? There could be a bounty on your head there. There's a bounty on my head everywhere." His smile turned wicked. "Besides, I want to see their faces when you arrive on a pirate ship, dripping in jewels and telling them all to go to hell." Despite everything, Elira laughed. It felt good, cathartic, like lancing a wound that had festered for years. "All right," she said. "We'll go back. And then the Caribbean is ours," Draven finished. He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her cheek. "No more hiding, no more shame. Just freedom and the open sea and treasure," Elira added, her lips quirking. "And treasure," he agreed. Then he kissed her, softly at first, questioning, giving her the chance to pull away. But Elira didn't pull away. She leaned in, her free hand fisting in his torn coat, kissing him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Draven rested his forehead against hers. "I think," he murmured, "this might be the greatest treasure I've ever found." "Flatterer," Elira said, but she was smiling. They stood there together as the ship cut through the dark waters. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds, bound by gold and secrets and something far more precious, trust. La Sombra del Diablo arrived at Cala Roja 3 days later at dawn. This time there were no cannons, no flames. The ship simply appeared in the harbor like a dark dream. Her black sails furled and dropped anchor. Elira stood at the bow, dressed in new clothes, a fine shirt and breeches Draven had procured for her, with a cutlass at her hip and her hair tied back like a proper sailor. Around her neck hung a single gold medallion from Vega's treasure. The villagers gathered on the shore, watching nervously. Elira could see Mateo, Carmen, Senora Torres, all the faces that had once been her entire world. A longboat was lowered, and Elira climbed down, followed by Draven, Rafe, and 2 other crew members carrying a heavy chest. They rowed to shore and stepped onto the beach. The village elder, a grizzled man named Santos, stepped forward, his expression wary. "Elira, we thought, after the raid, you thought I was dead," Elira said coolly. "No, I was very much alive. And I found what I was looking for." She gestured and Rafe opened the chest. Gold spilled out, gleaming in the early light. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "The map was real," Elira continued, her voice carrying. "My grandfather wasn't a liar or a drunk. He was the grandson of Alonso Vega, and he left me a legacy. This gold," she gestured to the chest, "is a gift. Use it to rebuild what was lost in the raid. Feed your families. Repair your boats." Santos stared at the gold, then at her. "Why?" "After what we did to you." "Because I'm not you," Elira said simply. "I don't punish people for fear and ignorance. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. You cast me out when I needed you. You called me a liar and made me an outcast. This gold doesn't erase that." She turned to Carmen, who stood near the back of the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "You were kind to me, even when others weren't. Thank you for that." Carmen nodded, unable to speak. Elira looked at Mateo, who had the decency to look ashamed. "And you, I hope you learn to be kinder to the next person who tells you an inconvenient truth." Then she turned and walked back toward the longboat. Draven fell into step beside her, and just before she climbed in, she looked back one last time at Cala Roja. "Goodbye," she said quietly. As they rowed back to the ship, Draven said, "Feel better?" "Yes," Elira admitted. "I do. Good, because we've got a meeting with a fence in Port Royal, and then I thought we might head west. I've heard rumors of another lost treasure, Spanish silver, sunk off the coast of Cuba. Elira laughed, shaking her head. You're incorrigible. I'm a pirate, Draven said, grinning. It's in the job description. They climbed back aboard La Sombra del Diablo, and as the crew raised anchor and unfurled the sails, Elira took her place at Draven's side on the quarterdeck. The wind caught the black sails, and the ship began to move, cutting through the waves with grace and power. Behind them, Cala Roja grew smaller, then disappeared entirely. Ahead lay the endless blue of the Caribbean. Full of possibility and danger and adventure, Draven reached for her hand, and Elira took it, lacing their fingers together. Ready? He asked. Elira looked out at the horizon, at the vast unknown stretching before them, and smiled. Ready, she said, and together, the Shunned girl and the pirate lord sailed toward their future, one built not on shame or violence, but on trust, freedom, and the promise of treasures yet to be found.